So hi, Cath. Amazing to have you on board to one of these fireside chats. You know, I was really keen to get you on board because, you know, lots of what we've been trying to do as part of these fireside chats is to sort of get people on board to sort of share their experiences, explain why what they're doing in EdTech is important, but also at the same time are now enabling the people who are listening to any of these fireside chats to sort of, I suppose, sort of partially pick people's brains and maybe, you know, take them into their own business and start learning from them as well. So that's the purpose. And I think it's really important to get people who deliver into the EdTech market like yourselves, who sort of support on PR and marketing, etc., and sort of get your opinions on why it's important and where, you know, and where it can benefit any particular company that's also in EdTech. So before we start off with anything, obviously I'll just introduce. So, you know, say Cath Lane. I think lots of people will probably already know you because you've been in EdTech since 2002. So initially with GL.
A long time, yeah.
Do you know what? It's one of these things. I think lots of people stay in EdTech for a long time. And I think it's because it's one of these sort of markets or industries where you feel, you know, that you can make a difference. And I know that sounds quite cliche, but I think it does hold true. And lots of people I know go round and round in different companies, but they almost stay in EdTech itself. So in 2003, oh, go on, sorry.
No, I was going to say it's totally true. I came from a background of just like pure tech PR, and once I found EdTech PR, it's just like my home, essentially, for those very reasons.
So, you know, regarding your business, most of your work is in EdTech, or is it all in EdTech?
So about 80% of what we do is in EdTech, and so we focus on the PR and marketing aspects for EdTech businesses. So we're getting them coverage in the media, on the website, and we're also running marketing campaigns. So there might be a piece of content that we're driving traffic to their site so that they can go on and put that lead in the sales funnel, essentially, and market to them. And I think one of the reasons that people are using us is because and you know this, selling to teachers is really, really hard. And I think selling to anyone is hard, but teachers just have so much on their to-do list. And, you know, we're not only saying educate the nation, we're saying, you know, you also need to pick up the pieces, essentially, of the nation as well, in terms of mental health and, you know, dealing with families in crisis. And so then responding to an email about features of a particular product just doesn't wash. And so people in this sector need specific skills to be able to talk to teachers in a way they respond. And essentially that's where we come in, and that's why we get employed.
Yeah, I think it's very true. It's interesting because a lot of, I think, EdTech starts from, and there's nothing wrong with this, you know, it starts from a technician, really. They say builds some software. It's normally the direction of travel. And then you get to this point where, you know, I think a lot of companies that we speak to, they talk about how can we grow, you know, because ultimately they surely should be coming. This is an amazing piece of software. In some cases, it is an amazing piece of software, but it comes back to your point. You know, I think sometimes people don't talk the right language, don't get the right advocacy, don't try and promote themselves in the right way. They sort of believe that people should come to them. And that doesn't work in EdTech.
No, and I think also there's this misconception that we can almost do everything at once, so that we can, you know, we need to speak to head teachers, and we need to speak to teachers, and we need to speak to NQTs, and we need to talk to the parents as well, and they'll influence the purchase. And I think that's an awful lot of noise, especially new businesses or businesses trying to change direction. And so what they need to do is have a real kind of prioritization process almost, and say, okay, but which one first? And then the answers to kind of some of the questions about what we should do, what messages we should use, become immediately a lot clearer in this sector.
Yeah, No, I totally, yeah, there's almost an element of sometimes being niche is quite useful, because I suppose you can be a bit more specific around the messaging, and I guess, so it resonates. I'm assuming that's the sort of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, so and differentiation as well, in terms of, in the same way that we are an education focused agency, that allows us very specifically to hone our skills to that sector, to be very attractive to the sector. And it's the same if you are if you have a product as well. If you're trying to do everything for everyone, it's very difficult for the audience to almost define themselves for you. And so that kind of niching is incredibly important.
And do you think that's changed in the way that we sort of promote businesses now? Is it different since COVID, and is it different? Have schools sort of have a stronger understanding of what Edtech can do for them, or do you think it hasn't changed? Do you think we're still having to sort of I suppose message in the same way as before COVID? And
so I'm quite a positive person, so I always had the belief that schools did understand the value of Edtech. I think the issue was always time, and it never got to the top of the to-do list. And I think with necessity, that became essential, that they did find the time to find out what worked, or which brands essentially were making it easy for them to switch quickly. So those brands that really got on the front foot immediately and started providing free services for schools, helping schools on board a lot quicker. And I appreciate, from the Edtech industry's point of view, there was an awful lot of extra hours involved and a lot of exhausted people. But I think that's also another thing about this sector, is you can really feel for your customer base, you understand them, and that's what's the beauty of the sector is. And you have a lot of people in the sector that have formerly worked in schools, so they were willing to put in all those extra hours to do the necessary.
I totally agree. I think that is one of the attractions of the sector, really, in Edtech, isn't it? I think also there's a point you made which I think is really important, which is about making things easy. And we always talk about it as in the sort of create things as frictionless as possible. But that also, in some cases, means about the messaging as well, and getting people, making it easy for people to understand what you do, or what you can deliver to them. Is part of that, as much as it is about making sure that the software is frictionless and getting to that value point is frictionless as well. But the messaging is also important there.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that the pandemic exposed was an awful lot of Edtech. So the thing about Edtech is quite often you have brilliant people, often who worked in schools, or even if they didn't work in schools, they really understood schools, making brilliant products. And almost what the pandemic showed was that in a lot of those cases, it was the people selling the product. So through workshops, visits to schools, and some of the branding, the messaging wasn't as required, because the people were doing the legwork. These brilliant people were doing the legwork. What the pandemic exposed, that when those avenues were cut off to people, that we couldn't just do a workshop in a school or go to an event, that what was left was not enough to sell the product. And so we were extremely busy after the initial intake of breath, when everyone went, what the hell has happened? We were extremely busy helping brands, I suppose Edtech brands, shift to a different way of doing things. And and I think the other thing that was also interesting about the pandemic was people became happier with experimentation a bit more, whereas prior to the pandemic, even with existing clients where you've built trust, you might say, okay, let's just throw up £100, let's say £100 to try out a bit of see how these ads work on Instagram or something like that. And there was very much people wanting a surety of approach that whatever we do, 100% has to deliver. Yep. Whereas there's very little learning in that type of approach. We always stick to what's known. Whereas what we've noticed since, because we were always suggesting these things, is people are more willing to, have a go. And what that does is it actually improves learning, which improves your marketing, it improves your messaging, which, let's try 2 sets of content, let's try 2 sets of ads, and see which one works best, see which one gets the right response, calculated risk. Obviously, we're not going to suddenly tell you to do something mad but, certain calculated risks are worth it. And that was, taking it from a marketing point of view, that was one of the real, step changes of the pandemic as well, which has been really good. It's continued. Now things are going back to normal. That has continued.
I think that's really good because actually we when we're building software and, there is an element of iteration, which is all about really testing, making sure it's right, do the next step, add to it, or it's like experimenting, isn't it? It's constantly sort of going, oh yeah, is this right? Yes, it is. Right, we've got reassurance. Let's try something a little bit different. And going back to that sort of 1% marginal gain sort of type of approach where you go, can we tweak this? Can we keep tweaking this? Can we keep tweaking this? So I quite like the way that, if that's the way that the market was working with you in the sense of willing to test and iterate, I think that's a great place to be.
Well, also what you get is this partnership approach, which is much more, a partnership of equals, and what you're all working together, like for the business objectives, essentially, much like, I suppose, in product development, if you're working with the customer, you closely with the customer in development, you're going to get a better product. And it is very similar, from our point of view in marketing and PR as well, that consultative approach to a program and a campaign.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned about sort of, people were doing things differently because they were wanting to raise their profile and so on. What do you, what advice would you give in the sense of if people are really interested in saying, right, I need to raise the profile of my company or themselves, what advice would you give to basically start that process off? Apart from going to obviously yourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the key things are having the clarity around the journey. So it's not just I need to get more sales for this particular product. Or I need to drive traffic for this reason. It's what's going to happen when someone comes to your website, what interaction are they going to have? And so I think that's incredibly important. So you can do the most fantastic campaign and you get loads of people signing up as a result of your press coverage and an amazing piece of content. Let's say it's a wellbeing app and you have got content in all, so we wouldn't do features and functions type promote. We can do, and we have done as part of a larger program, but that's not our bread and butter. So we might have some coverage in the press around, I don't know, self-harm issues in, how you're dealing with this overwhelming, increase in self-harm in teenagers. And then we would have maybe a download to go with it. So you've got the coverage hitting, you've got the content, you're driving traffic to the website, and then boof, what happens? Because there will be a few people that will sign up for the product at that particular point, but the majority of us need more of a massage into the sales process, sales funnel. And so I think that long-term vision is incredibly important. And there are, a number of organizations, some that we work with, some that we don't, that do have that long-term vision, and that helps the process, rather than the assumption that it's going to be a big bang and then everything falls in our lap. There is an element of that, but there needs to be the long-term massaging down the funnel to make sure that they're then invited to a webinar, or they're then, you know, receive a call from, you know, a 15-minute, I don't know, consultation, or, you know, whatever the next step would be in that particular sales process. I think that is particularly key. And that's, you know, because we've touched on some of the other elements, the messaging, the clarity, you know, exactly prioritizing which your first audience first. Don't try, it's an example from a different sector, but I just, you know, a couple of days ago was having a conversation and with someone we do a little bit of in health as well, and they were saying, you know, we need to talk to this job title, this job title, this job title, this job title. But it's kind of ask yourself, well, if I could get you one appointment with one person in that hospital or whatever it was, who would that be? Then that's who you need to focus on first. Once you've established that, then your circle can move out. Once you've got things moving with that audience, it's then far easier to add on beyond that. But if you haven't got your messaging right, you know, if you haven't understood that audience and, you know, what makes them tick, what's on their to-do list, then, you know, you're trying to take on too much before you start, really.
Yeah, that resonates in a big way. You know, we've definitely, you know, there's lots of companies that sort of go, right, we want to take on the UK market, and you go, okay, it's a big market, you know.
It's quite big, yeah,
and it's diverse in the sense of, in England, you know, you've got academies, obviously, as we all know, and you've also got maintained schools, which both have different needs and they have different personas. So you have to segment it out that way. Then you've got primary and secondary, again, different in their needs and different in the messaging, and potentially the buyers are different as well, and Matt's. And then you've got Wales, then you've got Northern Ireland as well, and Scotland, and they all buy differently, and they all have different needs as far as, you know, how you're going to message them and connect to them. So it is very interesting when people say, I just want the UK, I just want to come into the UK.
And I think the other thing that's important in those messages is once you've decided the priority, is getting those messages right. And I think if you're not inside of the education space yourself, and you don't come from that background, it's sometimes hard. Assumptions are very easy to make. So the number of times I talk to Edtech brands and they say, oh, well, the schools need to do this because, you know, it helps improve Ofsted, you know, their Ofsted results. And if you can imagine what it's like to be a teacher, and with that to-do list that we spoke about that covers not just education, and all you are doing is being bombarded by advertising which says Ofsted, Ofsted, Ofsted. That doesn't necessarily create now, I appreciate there are some, if you're doing Mocksteds, you do have to talk about Ofsted, but if you are doing, you know, I don't know, parental surveys or wellbeing apps or something like that, you don't necessarily need to talk about Ofsted. There's more important things on that teacher's to-do list at that moment in time than making them worry more about Ofsted. And so it's understanding, having a, you know, there are Facebook groups and, you know, bloggers, and if it's hard for you to get to schools and talk, but generally most people, I mean, I went to university with someone who is a teacher, I have friends in my teacher group, I'm always like talking to them about how they feel about X, Y. So even if it's hard as it has been in the last couple of years to get out to schools, get in amongst teachers, there are ways and means that you can, you know, get the information you need about what is really worrying teachers or head teachers or CEOs of MAPs at the moment, and start making sure that your messages, where they do actually, that there has to be some, you know, truth in the alignment, but make sure you're addressing those areas of concern rather than the ones you have assumed they're worried about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's really interesting because obviously some of the influencing as well or influencers, I guess now, especially with schools, is obviously parents as well. And you did an amazing campaign with Lexplore.
So that is one of those. So one of the things you get quite often, and definitely not with Lexplore. Lexplore is like a, they understand PR, they understand how you get media coverage, but occasionally you get particularly when someone's launching with investment, they'll say, we want coverage on the One Show, we want coverage on a morning sofa, we want to be in the Guardian, the TES, and it's and we can do all those things. We've done all those things for our clients. But it doesn't happen like that. It's very hard to get it like that unless you've got, we can do it. So if you're prepared to invest in some research, some data, then we can do it very quickly. Often these things take time, and that was the situation with Lexplore. We actually pitched that story 6 months prior to it appearing. Yeah, so and it doesn't always take that long, and we've had other clients where we have, but we've known when we've spoken to them, we can get you coverage, and within they've given us the account, and within 12 days we've had them on the Sunday Times, on Channel 5, on but we've known because of the story. But most brands aren't coming to us with the story that is, it's one of those situations that if you are Microsoft or Apple, yes, you can get on the front page for a product launch. Yeah. For the rest of us, we have to work a little harder, and it's our job to help you work a little harder. So I think one of the things we did with that is we put a really good filter on the story. So we didn't talk about features and functions. We spoke about things that we knew the journalist would be interested in, and compared it to something else, and it worked. It just didn't work out that they didn't have space for it at the time we pitched it, but over a 6-month period, and then they came back and basically said, okay, it's gone through the editor's meeting now, we want it. But like I say, we've had others where we've known, like, okay, we can do something. If we put the right filter on this, we can get you coverage tomorrow. And we have done. It depends on how much, people are willing to invest as well in the story. So the thing about national coverage is you need a whole story package. So we do need, for example, if it's a school product, we would need a school, we would need a teacher talking about it, we would need a pupil. So they're not necessarily going to interview the CEO. We can get you coverage, say, on Wake Up to Money, on, maybe another element of the company's growth, perhaps. But if you want to talk about the product, then it's better to have a school or a pupil talking about it, rather than your CEO, with exceptions. Sometimes the CEO was, we've had someone that was a co-founder of Pixar, and when you've got that, it's very interesting to talk to that individual. So yes.
Oh, man. And is timing sometimes important, in the sense of if there's something happening in the marketplace and it's relevant to somebody's solution, then is it about sometimes timing, or do you find that doesn't really, no one can work that quickly to build up that package to then deliver for that particular time, when something becomes so, safeguarding is probably one of those.
Yeah, there's two elements to that. So there's what we call newsjacking. So something hits that you're not necessarily expecting, and you're aware, you've already got, your spokesperson prepped. You've already got schools lined up that that are good to talk to, that are easy to talk, that are happy to talk on those subjects. And then you jump on the back of it and say, we've got, this individual to speak to, and you've got usually spoken to the press about that individual at some point, anyway. So, there's a bit of relationship building there. The other option is where you work a story to to a particular time frame. So, for example, I don't know when this is going out, but Mental Health Week is coming out.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got a product related to that, you can build a story around that. We've also suggested clients delay a launch. So when you're launching a product, it would be better. So, for example, a product related to an alternative to university, let's say, an alternative study option to university, we would be saying to that client, they might want to do their PR launch in, I don't know, June. We might say, if you can wait a couple of weeks till July, we will pick up until it goes public. Obviously, we'd be speaking to the press prior to that. We can pick up all that, what your next steps are, results are coming out, what if you fail type activity. And then around the A-level results time, where obviously some students unfortunately won't get what they expected, we will be newsjacking and pushing the individuals out as speakers on the topic as well. And perhaps students that had done it previously. So there are different ways, and then you can just create the news as well. That's an option. If you're working to an existing timetable, it does work well, but you can create the news. It requires effort and time, and sometimes investment as well. So you can do it. So one of the easier ways is through data, and so a lot of edtech firms are basically, because most of them are in kind of they're browser-based, SaaS-based solutions now. There is a lot of data on there which anonymized, and if it's written into the contract, presumably that they can use anonymized data for those purposes, is very useful to show trends. So, let's say, we were just talking earlier, I spoke about a wellbeing app. Let's say there is this is completely made up, but let's say there is a wellbeing app that's tracking, I don't know, how children are feeling in primary school. Well, when announcements such as the Ukraine war was announced, I mean, possibly not the greatest example, but I don't know, Earth Day or something like that, you can start to see that actually, children's concerns around particular topics or anxiety levels increased the week after those announcements were made. Is that something we could use as a news story to show, particularly if you treat it very sensitively around what you can do about those concerns, and have experts there around young children's anxiety, to actually promote. And then not only are you promoting your brand, you're promoting your brand with the messaging that you want it to have, which is that supportive, we're here to help you as teachers, rather than we're just telling you, the news ain't great sort of approach.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because there is, and I know you said this at the very beginning as well, that there is a natural tendency for people to sort of go, look at what my product does, and it's all about what it does rather than the why, or the sort of or even just in some ways don't talk about your product as much. If you can talk more about the problem and how it can be solved, and that your product probably in some ways has some way of supporting, I think people take that as much more interested in that sort of story, because it doesn't feel like a sales pitch. It feels like it's talk about a serious problem, and actually here's a number of ways of solving that problem, and maybe your solution is part of that solution, but it's not the full solution necessarily.
That's right, totally.
Yeah, interesting. And also you do a lot more with data as well now. So I think last time we spoke, I know we've sort of known each other for a while, but last time we spoke, you also do a lot with data now, and sort of support businesses. Is that right?
In terms of the PR that we do, so one of the things that we've actually got a business on the side that does reports, just long form reports.
Yep.
And so we get involved in data reports there, just interpreting data in a way that's very digestible, either to an audience, perhaps it could be an investment audience, or it could be the media. So we worked for the last couple of years, for example, on the Juniper National Dataset Report. And we also, for those companies that are trying to get investment at the very early stages, we've written reports for the venture capitalists and things like that to actually describe what the company vision is. So that's quite interesting. It's more Chris's side than my side, but it's quite interesting because you're almost helping them with their messaging from day one. So it's a very iterative process where there's a lot of stages, a lot of feedback, and yeah, I think from our point of view, one of the most interesting things is you get to inside the head of a lot of different business people, a lot of entrepreneurs, which is, I assure you, absolutely fascinating, really, really fascinating, and different. That's not just in education as well, that's different industries, and yeah, totally fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the three things, if somebody's going to come to you, what are the three things that you would ask them to have prepared or ready to work with you, so that basically, you can kick or hit the floor running, as it were? What are the three things that you would want from them? That's always a difficult question, because you sort of go, well,
I know, that's an amazing question. That's lovely. It's always like a wish list. And I think one of the things is the answer to the question why. So it is the clarity of the business goal. And so we'll often get responses like, oh, we've got to be everywhere, or we need to be on the front page of X, or, and actually the question is always why. What are you trying to achieve? Not just the initial sales goal, because generally it does come back to sales. Sometimes it's changing in behavior, sometimes we're taken on because there's not a very great view of a particular company and we're there to change it or something like that. But essentially a lot of the behaviors are down to increasing sales, but there's usually a longer term goal as well in terms of the vision of the business. And I think it sometimes happens when maybe someone very senior in the organization has asked a marketing team to employ a PR agency without giving them the full why for that. And so I suppose tracking back from that is like why, and if it's sales, how many sales by, realistically, growing 300% in 2 months is quite rare, but how many sales? Because what that does is it allows us to do that priority thing, because then we'll start saying, okay, who are those sales going to come from? And then we'll start to understand what the issues are. So it's around the messaging. And that's our job. In a lot of cases there will be some messaging from the company, but we put it through that filter that makes sure it hits relevant to the teacher or school leader or CEO of a MAT. And so that kind of messaging is our job. And then it's what success looks like, which I suppose links back to the business goal, is understanding what do you want to see at the end of this. What does good look like, essentially, and those are key for us getting started really quickly on your job, basically, and making it a success.
Amazing. No, thank you for that. It's interesting about the why, because I'm quite a big fan of the Simon. I think everybody's probably seen it, but the Simon Sinek why thing, and he's right. And what you were saying as well. Sometimes having clarity, because in some cases the actual revenue sort of going, we want to increase our business by 300%, as he'll say, is almost a result of understanding your why. If you understand your why, and you can articulate it well, then you might find that's a result of what comes out of, from a visionary perspective.
And also it allows us, because we are not focused on a particular product's features to sell a product, we need to make sure that whatever messaging we're delivering, or a piece of content or a guide, is helping your audience, your, teachers, school leaders, what have you, put you in that box that allows you to deliver that vision. Because if they're not with you on that journey, you're never going to get there, because they're your customer base. They're the only ones that are going to facilitate or fund your development, and so they have to believe in you, and that's part of our job, is providing the right content and messages to make sure your customers are on that journey with you. And that if there are any bumps in the road, which there will be for any sort of ambitious edtech company, that those bumps are kind of have some sort of cushioning around them through that. So you have the loyalty of your audience when you hit those bumps, so they recover from them quicker, or they support you through them. And also, if there are some inevitable things that happen, data losses and things, that they're managed effectively, so then the messaging that goes around them means that you can get back to business as usual fairly quickly without too much impact.
Oh, that is amazing advice. That it absolutely resonates in the sense of, I think if people understand emotionally what you're trying to achieve, and what you're in EdTech for, or what your business is about, then you're right. I think it's easier for people to then accept the bumps, because they understand where your ultimate goal is, in the sense of what your objective is as a business. I think that's great advice. Great advice.
And if you're honest with your responses as well, and open, people give you much more leeway than if you're a closed shop and you're not communicating with your audience, your customers, potential customers. It just doesn't work if you hit what we call a crisis.
No, absolutely. Do you know it's something I always talk to all our customers, and lots of times on these fireside chats. I perceive there's lots of people who are our customers when we're both work for Sims and that sort of thing. Well, you were helping Sims from a consultancy perspective, but we're working for Sims, but ultimately, there's people that I classed then as like critical friends, and they're all customers, and I now class them as friends, because obviously I don't need that. Thankfully, no one's criticizing me about my software or our software anymore, so I've got that freedom at the moment. But they are friends. That's how close I think Sims built up their relationship with the people around them, with the help of your sales and also the people within the business. I think everybody had the same understanding of the why. So everybody within that business understood what Phil wanted and wanted that business to be, I think. And that enabled us all to have that really strong relationship.
But I think in that sense, Phil really lives and breathes his, like Sims was the essence of him. He kind of lived and breathed. And, if you read any of these leadership books, they talk about, showing what you want other people, demonstrating what you want other people to demonstrate. I think he just did it naturally, and everyone was happy to follow, and that's a really good lesson for other edtech brands. I think the other more practical lesson as well is, one thing that the business did very well is they had a program of like schools that they used as almost like an advisory council. So yes, you'd have user groups where everyone could talk to product managers, and product managers would go out and do their individual chats with schools and get feedback. However, there was a group of, I don't know what it was, 25, 50 schools or whatever, who were, that you could talk almost about anything in the sector with, and you had that feedback in terms of, I suppose, making sure you get your messaging right. Something like that for a brand, having, and you might be a small brand, so you can only manage it with 5 schools. but having that relationship with those schools and making sure they get something out of it as well, discounts, training, whatever it is. But yeah, it really improves your process, your product, your marketing, everything, I would imagine. So.
No, it comes back to, as I suppose, the whole thought of community. Having a community around you, I think, is strong.
And one of the things this market has in terms of teachers is they do that naturally anyway. So if you are a brand that manages to hit the right notes with the teacher, they talk about you. We had something featured on one of the Facebook groups. I think it was primary head teachers or something like that. And the interaction with that, the relevant page on the website associated with that just kind of went through the roof a couple of days as a result of that. And, you know, they trust each other. And if you can tap into that in some way using, you know, your ambassador schools to speak at other events, those kind of things, it can really make a difference.
Yeah, well, actually, that again, a really great point. You know, that whole sort of advocacy piece, I think, works really well in this industry. You know, that teachers love talking to other teachers, and I think they also, you know, head teachers love talking to other head teachers and so on, because I think that's where they build up a lot of their trust, is actually from their peers. And what they're doing and how they're, you know, because I think they're great at learning. You know, that's the great thing about, well, I suppose it's education, but they're great at sort of learning and understanding, you know, and listening to each other, which I think is, you know, it's a remarkable industry for that.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways the brands sometimes get it wrong is they want the teacher just to talk about their product.
Yeah.
And it feels uncomfortable and natural for teachers. They will do it because they're genuinely decent human beings. And if you want them, you know, they will volunteer for stuff. But they feel much more comfortable if you ask them to talk about, you know, the children or the issue that the product was designed to solve. And the content you get is far, far better if you do it that way as well. So perhaps that's another tip for any emerging edtech brands.
No, that's amazing. Another amazing tip. So if there's one thing now, what's the next thing for the influence crowd? What's the next step? Where are you going to go? What's the next big thing?
The next big thing, well, to be honest, our whole raison d'etre is to keep learning, keep experimenting, keep doing the best we can to know what's out there to make sure we're delivering the best results for our clients. So one of the things is just the ongoing you know, changes to algorithms and things like that, which means obviously we have to change what we're doing. So that takes up quite a bit of our time. Personally, I'm doing a lot on TikTok research because I think there is a huge opportunity for the EdTech brands there. So that's kind of a watch this space for us.
Cool. Well, excellent talking to you again, Cath, and thanks very much for doing this. I think there's loads of things for people to take away. You know, in summary, you know, number one, definitely try and understand your why, especially if you're going to come and speak to Cath about doing PR and marketing. I think building that community piece and understanding your clients, your customers who are effectively teachers, and building a close relationship to listen to them so you can build up the right sort of messaging. Something else, you know, that Cath's been just talking about as well, is really fundamental. And obviously I'm a bit biased because I've known you for a long time, but also, you know, if you really want to, you know, explode with your PR and your marketing, then absolutely, you know, speak to Cath, because I think, you know, you've been in the market for a long time. I don't mean by age, I mean in the sense of you've been in the market for a while, but also, you know, so, and you've helped many brands. So, you know, absolutely, you know, I don't normally plug a company when we do this, but absolutely, I think people should talk to at least. So a big thank you again for the time. I appreciate you're really busy at the moment. We're just talking before off sort of camera and how everything sort of exploded. And so, you know, thanks very much for taking the time out and doing this chat.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.